This video is sponsored by the Ferengi Benevolent Society. More on that later in the video.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
Once upon a time, there was a television show called Star Trek. It was about that guy from that episode of Twilight Zone where it's the monkey on the side of the plane and he's freaking out about it.
There's a man out there. What?
In this show, he would fly around the galaxy saying things real slow and dramatic. He was accompanied by a space elf and a doctor who I don't think has ever saved anyone's life ever.
He's dead.
They would get up to all sorts of hijinks, like fist-fighting trick-or-treaters in the desert, or reading the Declaration of Independence to cavemen, getting wildly drunk on brandy, and most important of all, playing dress-up.
Gestapo, I believe.
Quite correct. You should make a very convincing Nazi.
What?
But on the other hand, sometimes the episodes would try and be about things. Shocking, I know. Like being a naughty boy is no good, or don't judge a book by its cover. Time travel is complicated, and driving a stick shift is hard.
I kind of like this. I'm gonna get one myself.
Jokes aside, the original series is a real trip, and it's worth watching, but clearly, when we're talking about Star Trek as something relatively profound, especially for television, we talk about The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. We do not talk that way about Voyager, because we all know better, right?
Here's a brilliant idea. Why don't we just fly away from it?
Why don't we get out of here?
How can it be this bad so consistently?
It's just like, what are you doing?
Detecting an organism within the vinculum.
Oh, God.
Appears to be a viral.
Oh, now it's a biological hazard?
You brought a fucking anthrax bomb on the ship. Anyways, those other two are real good, since they finally began to truly embody what the original series was sort of attempting, this complex but still realistic utopian future about exploring the stars and answering questions both scientific and philosophical for the good of all sentient life in the universe, or whatever. Now, much of that would take the form of the now rather generic techno-babble which Star Trek is famous for. However, other times it manifested not in endless streams of pseudoscience, but instead was shown through the interactions of characters, cultures, and belief systems. Nowhere is this more evident than the latter of those two series, Deep Space Nine, which focused heavily on the dynamics of clashing cultures both around the galaxy as well as on the station from which the show gets its name. Unlike the campy but classic crew of the original series or the more diverse though still grounded crew of The Next Generation, DS9 had the benefit of pulling off one of the finest tropes for developing a gallery of characters, because they were the guys who have no business being along for the ride yet somehow make it work style of party.
A party! For you, I would reduce my catering rates.
Not a party.
Yeah, see, supposedly when they were first doing The Next Generation, there were these imperatives from Gene Roddenberry that the characters couldn't have any real conflicts with each other because that would defeat the point of this sort of utopian future. Now, eventually that sort of fell by the wayside, and for Deep Space Nine, it basically never existed. The point was to get people together who would have no other choice but to have conflict, which they did. What came of that was this incredible process where the characters at the beginning of the show were basically nothing like the characters at the end, and it's one of the few instances where long-form, televised continuity held up under scrutiny, and it's what made DS9 so great among many other things. At the same time, though, they never made the characters outright bastards or assholes. No one had any real ill will towards each other to the point that they'd throw hands on sight.
How's that?
Awful!
Cisco might be a hard ass, but he's still a good person. Quark might be a sleazy salesman, but he never sells something that would get everyone killed. No one was outright working against the station in favor of something else. All except for one character, that is. See, there's this guy in the station who isn't all that he seems, and what's better, he doesn't really try to hide it. He knows the crew aren't idiots, and the writers know the audience aren't idiots either. And with that combination comes one of the only characters who defines their own wholly unique archetype that quite literally has never been tried since. That's because there's something about Garak.
Before I became a tailor, I lived by a simple motto. Never let sentiment get in the way of your work.
Alright, just a brief explanation for those who don't know Deep Space Nine all that well. So Deep Space Nine, the station, not the show, has all these non-military personnel on it since that's how stations work in Star Trek. You got Quark and his bar, you got Bashir, who basically runs a free clinic on the promenade. There's all these other places like the Klingon worm dude guy.
Let's see now. We'll have some Racht, of course. Racht.
Man, I love that guy. But also on the first floor of the promenade is a humble little tailor shop run by a man named Elam Garak, and what's important about him is evident the second you lay eyes on him. He's a Cardassian. You know the Cardassians, the militarized nationalists, also known as one of the galactic states most adverse to the utopic view of the future that the Federation and Starfleet try to embody. They're a nation ruled by the military, who instill in their citizens a zealous love and loyalty of the state and its martial traditions, viewing the central authority of the Central Command to be absolute. They're also the former owners of the station itself, having placed it over Bajor during their occupation. The Cardassians have left the station, of course, and yet Garak remains. No prizes for guessing that he's not actually a tailor. Garak is clearly a spy. I mean, just look at him. He's on the station to keep tabs on the goings-on and to make sure nothing untoward is happening that could threaten the Central Command. And yet, when he's clearly confronted with this idea, he plays dumb. Furthermore, he's not actually concerned with what's going on, like, at all. The brilliance of Garak is his obvious duplicity. In a show where everyone's biases are often on full display, Garak keeps his thoughts close to his chest. He speaks in snide remarks and imply he knows way more about what's going on than he should. Everyone knows he's a spy, Bashir most of all, who keeps a daily rapport with the tailor even though he's clearly up to something. At any moment, Garak is going to reveal his hand and do a big evil thing or something that will make everyone say, "That Cardassian has no honor," and then we'll go on our way. That big moment eventually comes in the episode Profit and Loss, ostensibly a Quark episode that in the end involves Garak as the decisive character. This episode follows a group of Cardassian political refugees fleeing towards Federation space. These people are opponents of the Cardassian military leadership, which makes them an obvious target given their status as agitators. The episode mostly follows Quark getting involved and trying to smuggle them off the station while they're pursued by Cardassian operatives from their nation's super spooky intelligence agency, the Obsidian Order. The episode ends in a confrontation between all parties involved, and then surprise, surprise, Garak shows up. Looks like it's time for him to play his hand, right?
But you admit that they're wrong. Why don't you stand up for what you believe in?
More to the point, what do you believe in, Garak?
What are you doing here, Turan?
Making sure that you carry out your assignment. I suspected that 2 years living among the Bajorans would make you soft. I see that I was right.
You've never been right about anything. Now step aside, Turan, and allow me to finish this sorry business.
I will take over from here.
Why? So you can take the credit and to make sure I remain in disgrace?
I can't believe that you were once considered clever. Do you think that by completing this one simple task, your reputation will be restored at Central Command?
No, I suppose not.
Go back to your sewing kit, Taylor.
Holy shit, Garak blue on blue, what the hell? Yeah, that's right. In a surprise twist, Garak isn't really a spy, or at least he's not a spy anymore. Turns out him being so open about the whole thing was because he got kicked out a while ago, and yet to him, his mission is still plainly obvious.
You have to tell me, why'd you do it?
Shoot Turan. Why did you let Professor Lang go?
I have no choice. I love her.
And I love Cardassia, which is why I had to do what I did.
Was Garak pretending the whole time? I mean, it's hard to tell because the thing about Garak is that he's far too good at being sneaky to get a good read on. He and his fellow operative claim that his mission was to take out the distance, and of course, Garak doesn't do that. You could say that this idiot's insistence on embarrassing Garak pushed him over the edge, but then why would he justify his actions to Quark as being for the good of Cardassia? The answer is simple. Garak is a tool of the state, a simp for the nation, if you will. But that doesn't mean that Garak thinks the central command is actually Cardassia. The brilliance of Garak as a spy character, motivated by his background like everyone else in the show, is that he knows from the start that Cardassia is corrupt, and it's more than fallible. He basically lived the Star Trek equivalent of James Bond. He's probably killed plenty of people, both deserving and not, and eventually it was him who was at the mercy of the state and the organizations he worked so hard to uphold. And they just threw him away. This is the same state that threw away countless Cardassian lives in the wars against the Federation and Bajor, who inflicted outrageous suffering against occupied planets, who would fund proxy wars against Federation colonists, and who would ultimately kowtow to the Dominion during the war, leading to untold devastation across the Alpha Quadrant. The Central Command may control Cardassia, but they are not Cardassia. At least not anymore. Garak, then, is the character who embodies this idea of the agent who actually does good. He doesn't do what he does for the glory and honor of Cardassia. That's more of a Klingon thing. He doesn't do it because he's a sociopath. He doesn't do it because he's a sycophant. He does it because he actually cares on a philosophical and sociological level about Cardassia the culture, and Cardassia the people. The state, whether civilian or military, is merely a byproduct. It's the inverse of other characters in the show who have similar conclusions. Sisko greatly respects the Federation and Starfleet, but he doesn't really come to criticize them until much later in the series, when they too begin to fall into the traps of political scheming and corruption. Garak is ahead of them all because he's been around the block, man, and while they might still grapple with the morality of the question as to, what are we gonna do this week, Garak doesn't have any such qualms. He's wholly amoral when it comes to getting the job done. I mean, hell, the fact he even kills anyone in the show, let alone in cold blood like he does, is so much more important in Star Trek than any other show that you could possibly think of. Star Trek characters aren't supposed to be badass killing machines. It's not Star Wars, brother. Even as far back as the original series, killing people was a really rare occurrence, often only done as a last resort or in self-defense. DS9 would change that, given that the latter half of the series grapples with the outbreak of the Star Trek equivalent of a world war. But even then, the callous, personal nature of Garak's actions is pretty shocking in the moment. I want to take a moment to thank this video's sponsor, the Ferengi Benevolent Society. The Ferengi Benevolent Society has been the Alpha Quadrant's leading charitable organization since 2371, and continues to be a leading pioneer in funding of the sciences and intergalactic outreach programs, including things like generous and affordable loan programs, low-cost replicator development and installation services, galactic trade law reform, and much, much more. Here are just a few testimonials from many of the satisfied customers of the Ferengi Benevolent Society.
The Ferengi Benevolent Association is allied with the free peoples of the world. Through their tireless lobbying and financial expertise, they have secured House Dagoth, the aid necessary to displace the mongrel dogs of the Empire from Morrowind. Join today and put an end to imperialism.
Did you know that the Ferengi Benevolent Association will offer you financial assistance for the hiring of contract killers? I know, because I've personally worked with them. Why, just recently they paid me to assassinate some unsavory characters engaging in human trafficking along the border of Morrowind.
The Ferengi Benevolent Association, in accordance with similar organizations like the Ferengi Altruism Guild, are offering some exciting new deals for Archduke of Pseudo viewers just like you. Just click the link in the description and use the code SUCKER to get half off your first order of self-sealing stem bolts, perfect for all your mid-scale starship building needs. Just click the link below or go to www.quarksbar.com and use the code SUCKER for great deals and more. Bleh. I'll leave that in. Thank you to the Ferengi Benevolent Association for sponsoring this video. That's so fucking dumb. Now, with all this in mind, you might start to think that Garak is a cold, callous guy who only cares about Cardassia and being coy with people who think he's a spy. But that's also not really the case. Garak is at his core a good man who does very, very bad things for the purposes of achieving a greater goal that he thinks will make the galaxy a better place. If that means killing someone, he'll do it. If that means jumping at the chance to rejoin the Obsidian Order and destroy the Dominion, then he'll do it. If that means torturing one of the people on the station he's actually come to respect and empathize with and genuinely care for, then so be it. In the episode The Die is Cast, Garak and Odo get captured by a joint force of Romulan, Tal Shiar, and the Obsidian Order, who are on their way to launch a surprise attack on the founders of the Dominion. If they pull it off, the Dominion will be wiped out and their potential threat gone from the galaxy. Garak's father and a former Obsidian Order agent, Tain, offers Garak a chance to redeem himself and rejoin Cardassian society, but only if he can get information out of Odo that they could use. Now, with what you know about Garak, you just assume that he would go with what his father wants and torture the hell out of poor Odo. After all, Garak actively encourages that line of thought in a previous episode almost verbatim.
Oh, it all comes down to a question of loyalty, my dear doctor. Yuri had to choose between protecting his brother and protecting the state. He chose the state, as would I, every time.
I suppose that's one way of looking at it.
And yet here, while he does go through with Odo's torture, a torture that is downright grotesque by the standards of the show, by the way, it's not just the shapeshifter that feels the pain, it's Garak too. He hates this. He doesn't want to hurt Odo or anyone on Deep Space Nine. He just wants to serve Cardassia and make his father proud. But here, while the Romulan device tears Odo apart physically, it's tearing Garak apart mentally. When Odo finally lets something slip, something that's honestly not really that important about the Founders, Garak leaps on it as what he needs and instantly turns off the device. Garak is clever. He's a driven man through and through, but he is not a bad one. He really, truly does hate hurting people, Cardassians in particular. But especially as the series goes on, he shows clear and persistent remorse for the things he's done, even when others can't possibly sympathize. His most clear indication of this is his totally out-of-character breakdown in the episode After Image. By this point, Garak has been helping the Federation by decoding Cardassian transmissions, and yet the entire process has steadily been taking a toll on his mind. He's always been trying to rationalize his actions as being for the good of Cardassia, for its people, but that justification gets thinner every day he helps his people's enemies until it reaches a boiling point.
Because they won't be expecting an attack. Because they have no idea that I broke their code. All those Cardassians are going to die because of me.
I suppose that's one way of looking at it.
What other way is there?
That by helping to end the war, you'll be saving lives.
Saving lives? And what lives would I be saving? Human? Klingon? Romulan?
And Cardassian?
No, not Cardassians! They're going to fight to the bitter end. The Dominion will see to that. Don't you understand? Don't you see? I wanted to believe that I was helping my people, liberating them. But all I've done is to pave the way for their annihilation. I'm a traitor.
What a turn this is! For the longest time, Garak tended to be a funny character. Not that he wasn't serious, mind you, but his inclusion tended to have this tinge that he was joking around about how he was spying on everybody.
My understanding of this conference was that it was supposed to be an examination of the occupation from a dispassionate historical perspective. Instead, everyone went out of their way to dismiss virtually everything I had to say.
I thought the Bajorans bent over backwards to be polite to you, Garak.
Giving me a name tag that read Elim Garak, former Cardassian oppressor, was hardly polite.
But deep down, Garak is a man who is far too good at his job, far too good at lying, tricking, killing, torturing. He was trained to be a tool of the state, and when the state left him, he had nothing to do but bottle up his previous life and go on like nothing happened. To him, he's still in the game, regardless of the stakes, regardless of the threat posed by the Dominion or the Central Command, the Breen, the Federation. He still works for Cardassia, and eventually the Alpha Quadrant as a whole. In the end, he saves them all by taking on the burden of being a bastard, being a monster, In what's probably one of the best episodes in the entire series, In the Pale Moonlight. Why'd I say it like that? Garak performs his most heinous and yet masterful act of subterfuge during the Dominion War. He intentionally manipulates Commander Sisko into believing that he could convince the Romulans to join the war by presenting them with this fake set of Cardassian plans which outline an invasion of Romulan territory. It's a plan that the steadfast commander isn't really fond of because, obviously, by this point he's been bending rules and regulations like it's going out of style, but lying to an entire nation to bring them into a war, that's a bit too far. Still though, the Federation needs every bit of help they can get, so he agrees despite the obvious moral dilemma. Unfortunately for Sisko, the Romulans almost instantly figure out the plans are fake because they're Romulans. It wasn't gonna work. Just wasn't gonna work. And they make their way off the station to inform their government, only for their shuttle to be suddenly destroyed.
The Dominion assassinated a Romulan senator.
On a diplomatic mission.
That changes everything. It could even bring the Romulans into the war.
Excuse me.
Get up! You killed him.
That's right.
That's what you planned to do all along, isn't it? You knew the data rod wouldn't hold up to scrutiny. You just wanted to get him on the station so that you could plant a bomb on his shuttle.
It wasn't quite that simple. I did have hopes that the rod would somehow pass inspection, but I suspected that Tolar may not have been up to the task.
And what about Tolar? Did you kill him too?
Think of them both as tragic victims of war.
Garak's justifications for his false flag attack seem crazy, but there's just one problem. To Garak, a spy, a murderer, a simple tailor, it's the most logical, calculated act to bring about an end to the war as quickly as possible. Garak implicated Sisko and the Federation as a whole into murdering officials of another country to draw them into a conflict they wanted nothing to do with. And the worst part about it is that in the grand scheme of the Dominion War, Garak is absolutely right. He saw what no one else could see, and did what no one else could do, and like everything else, he buries his amorality under a ton of lies and phrases to keep himself going and his allies from having him hanged. And yet still, he thinks he's failed. The hard truth for the Federation, for Sisko, for Deep Space Nine, and yes, even for Garak, is that without his monstrous acts, without his total destruction of his worldview, his love for his people, culture, and nation, without all the people he kills, the planets he helped bring under siege, the soldiers ripped to shreds, and the ships burning in orbit, without all these things and more, the Dominion would have won. And then Cardassia, Bajor, Romulus, Earth, and everywhere else would have been at the Founder's mercy. Garak saved the Alpha Quadrant, and to do it, he had to give up his home, his family, his people, until there was nothing left. Except, of course, for one thing. He never had to give up his friends. Just like everyone else on Deep Space Nine, Garak became who he was through the exposure to ideas not his own, to peoples and cultures he never considered to be all that important or relevant to his or Cardassia's welfare. He changed alongside them all and became a better person as a result. Without them, he would never been able to help the Federation, never would have been able to grapple internally with his actions and his betrayals. He would have fallen apart thinking about how he slaughtered his kinsmen, how he failed to protect them and give them the better life they deserve. People like Bashir, whom Garak banter and converse with, helped him see the galaxy for what it really is. A place that doesn't need a central military authority lording over it, nor some far-off shape-shifting rulers and their genetically modified armies. On Deep Space Nine, he was able to live in peace with so many different people, many of whom outright hated him. And yet, if he could live that life, then why couldn't Cardassia? Despite his crimes, his weaknesses, his failings, they still stuck up for him, and he likewise helped them when he could. Not in any way they might have realized at first, of course. Garak would never admit how nice he actually wants to be. He would never actually tell you that he let those Bajorans go, which got him exiled. He would never tell you he hates men like Gul Dukat with a burning fire. Dukat did nothing wrong, by the way. He never let you know he was helping all along, because good spies don't get caught. But the best spies aren't spies to begin with. Sometimes they're just tailors. Or Klingon worm chef guys. And that's why Garak is so unique. He's deep on a level few characters in actual brilliant films and shows can stand up to. You watch Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul and you get a main character as the central pillar for complexity. But in DS9, that was basically everybody. And for Garak, a guy who doesn't even show up all the time, he got all this and more. It's hard to write someone like Garak, this funny murderer with a heart of gold, because one wrong move and he just becomes a bad guy who's funny. That's exactly what happens when we see Garak in the Mirror Universe episodes. Okay, another quick explanation. In the original series, there was an episode where Kirk and co get teleported to an alternate universe version of the Enterprise where everyone is evil. And like cartoonishly. It was basically just this excuse for everyone to mess around and have fun by playing the character, but just like the exact opposite version of that character. Like they have these pain chambers. They're like, oh, you messed up. You didn't carry the 2 into the pain chamber with you, and then they put you in. Anyways, DS9 also had some Mirror Universe episodes, which were basically just the exact same thing. Like Kira's this weird walking fetish joke, and Odo is just Odo, but actually mean instead of playful. And Quark is staunchly moral and an advocate for the downtrodden. And of course, there's Garak, who is, well, he's barely changed aside from just being outright evil. Where normal Garak goes the extra mile for a cause and a stalwart belief in something, Mirror Garak embodies what we could presume to be Garak before his exile, before he stopped being such a bastard. And what's more, where normal Garak's willingness to do anything is tied up in his secret moral code and his sense of duty to Cardassia, Mirror Garak only does things for himself, and he's willing to go to any length to get what he wants, no matter how evil, degenerate, monstrous, or just gross it is. And it's just great to see it because that's what Garak probably should have been. That's what Garak would have been if the writers were incompetent. Or if he was on Voyager, I guess. You notice that all these people are just the generic depiction of each race.
You said I wasn't contagious.
It's racial stereotypes.
This is a racist episode. He maintains his playful demeanor all the way up to the end of the series. He's the lovable bastard, and there's genuinely no other character like him. Deep Space Nine is the height of Star Trek because of the complexity of characters like Garak. Their in-depth dives into people who have no right to save anything, let alone the galaxy as a whole, are incredible and evocative in a way that new Trek can only dream of. I'm sure in the history books following the 24th century, there'll be whole sections dedicated to the heroes and leaders of the Dominion conflict. Starfleet Command, the Bajorans, the Cardassians, Sisko and the brave crew of Deep Space Nine, but they'll sadly be missing one key figure. A man you wouldn't find at his post on a starship, playing tricks at an embassy, or commanding armies on the ground. They'll miss the simple tailor on the promenade who destroyed himself to save everything. That's because there's something about Garak.
Do you know what the sad part is, Odo? I'm a very good tailor.
What a sorry state we're in.